thank you for being a part of the conversation today. You're joining us for a compare and contrast session with two global leaders setting the pace in the innovation market. We're going to look at crowdsourcing versus tech scouting. Which one's better? When would you use one over the other? When would you use them together or sequentially? So I'm Gina Sparrow. I work for HeroX as a strategic project manager. I'm so happy to be here with you both. I'm going to hand this over to Tim to get us started with some introductions. Enjoy the webinar. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you very much, Gina. And on behalf of Yet2, we are very honored to be here and to be your guests, and also very excited about coming partnership with HeroX. I'm Tim Bernstein. I am CEO of Yet2. I'm based out of Boston here with the majority of our team at our headquarters. I've been with the company almost 21 years now. My background, I have an MBA and a master's in technology commercialization. And these days, I spend a lot of my time thinking about how do large companies harness open innovation, not just to get pretty reports and interesting opportunities, but how do they move to impact with that flow of external input. And so with that, I will hand it over to Christian to introduce yourself as well.
Yeah, thanks, Tim, and hello. My name is Christian Cotichini. I'm the co-founder and CEO of HeroX, and I've been a long time entrepreneur, and my career is focused on really disruptive innovation and bringing that to market, and commercializing it, and making a business around it. And I'm fascinated by the process of innovation, especially the human side. So I've become a student of understanding how to plan for innovation, optimize for innovation, what innovation looks like when it's in progress versus what it looks like in hindsight. And I know that I've spent some time with Tim, and we have some really parallel and interesting work that we're doing in both our companies. So I'm excited to explore that.
Excellent. It's maybe that should have been our debate today instead, Christian, about disruptive versus incremental innovation, which is better, and why do large companies struggle? Because we also take a human-centered approach to that same exact question, but focused more on microeconomics and game theory, and what are the incentives that want to be innovators face inside these large companies? Why does that make innovation life hard for them? But maybe that's the next webinar.
Absolutely.
Good. And I see questions starting to flow in already. Gina is going to be tracking those, and she'll interject. And certainly, Christian and I more than intend to save a chunk of time after our speeches here to really engage in more of a dialogue around these questions. So please keep them flowing. That's terrific. So Yet2, just a brief background on us, and then I want to talk a little bit about crowdsourcing versus proactive technology scouting from Yet2's perspective before I turn things over to Christian. So Yet2, we've been around for 20 years. We are experts at harnessing open innovation to ignite corporate innovation, and we want to get all the way through to impact with you. How do we get to deals, and how do we get you moving products to market, new innovations into your processes, greater sustainability rolling out to the world? How do we get corporations to impact out of these activities? So we do a little bit of scouting. We also can do some work around business development, even ventures, and interacting with startup companies and even advising. We have a strong global network. We work very hard on our methodologies in particular, not just for the scouting, but for interacting with and advising and guiding our clients, large companies, to be able to take better advantage and move through to deals and impact with that flow of opportunity. So Yet2, I mentioned we have that large global network. We also have a strong and growing team of experts and that methodology around becoming a trusted partner, a virtual seat at our clients' tables. So then if you roll into our services, I'm not going to spend much time at all on this today, If you're interested, happy to follow up with you later. You can see in the leftmost column there that we actually have 4 different flavors of proactive scouting that we have innovated and introduced over the last few years. We run open innovation portal platforms now for about a dozen clients. We do a little bit of out licensing work, and we do some very interesting patent analysis for some of our clients as well. All of that really important tool sets feeding into that open innovation impact. So then if you roll toward the next slide, just to show very briefly here, most of our clients remain anonymous, and we keep their identities very carefully veiled because a lot of the work we're doing for them is very strategic, and they really don't want their competitors to know where they're headed next. But a few of our clients also use us publicly in their names, and so you can see a flavoring of our cross-industry and cross-geography base, as well a couple of testimonials there. I don't want to spend long on this again today, but our proactive scouting services, our intent is to both scour the earth and use all of Yet2's full channels globally to be able to bring you all of the most relevant solutions out there in the world that could solve a problem or a challenge. But we also, in the process, want to arm you to be able to make decisions very efficiently and move ahead toward that impact and toward those goals. So we're showing here one of our recent projects where we built a solutionscape of the 35 most promising solutions we were able to find out there in the world. And we were able to categorize them and flag them for interest. And actually you can see 3 different dimensions of categorization on this 2D page here. So we were pretty excited about that one.
Can you give an example of like the type of categorization you talk about, you work on here?
Yep. So in this case, we categorize, as I said, in 3 different dimensions. The first dimension was what technology domain does the solution come from? So in this case, we're talking about cold chain, transport of food and pharmaceuticals, where if you drop any warmer than minus 18 degrees Fahrenheit, you put minus 18 Fahrenheit, you put that food or that pharmaceutical at risk. And so today, what companies do in this cold chain is heavy insulation, significant power and energy in order to keep that cold of a temperature. We went out looking for technologies where you could, with a much smaller environmental footprint, actually more accurately protect those temperature variations. So the categories and the subcategories that we're showing there were different types of materials, devices, even a couple of service and new business model innovations. So at the top horizontal level there, it was generally different types of technologies. Then along the vertical, we looked at reusable versus compostable versus recyclable technology approaches. And then the third dimension was around level of interest for our clients, where yellow is really good and white is not quite so interesting. So the subject of the day, crowdsourcing versus proactive scouting. We really like proactive scouting, but dirty little secret, we also like crowdsourcing, and we think there's a time and a place for both. We also think that there are advantages and disadvantages of both, and so we're describing a little bit of that here on this next slide. So you can see that with open innovation and proactive technology scouting, we can anonymously seek external R&D, technologies, new startup companies, innovations coming out of the large corporates they aren't talking about yet. All of that without revealing our clients' identity, so they don't give away competitive intelligence to the world until they're really ready to do so. Technology proactive scouting does have some issues, some challenges that go along with it. We talk in microeconomic terms about knowledge asymmetries. We also talk about the need for negotiation in order to reach a deal with those most promising solution providers. And sometimes that goes well, and sometimes it doesn't go so well. We've gotten better and better over time at advising our clients on how to get through those negotiations successfully, how to match a large company pace with a startup pace. So we've become pretty expert in those types of dynamics, but there are certainly some concerns about the proactive scouting. Similarly, with the crowdsourcing, consumer goods ideation, ideas about new molecules. Christian's going to talk a lot about where you use crowdsourcing to great effect. We've definitely seen some issues with crowdsourcing as well. IP can be tricky. What if they own something really powerful and they don't want to share it, but they do want to raise their hand and say, well, they should be considered? That sometimes lends itself better to a proactive scouting approach. Significant management effort required, especially around keeping your crowds happy. And we're going to be very curious to hear you talk a little bit about that, Christian. The crowd challenges are often in the client's name, which could see competitive response. However, there are times and places where the crowd can be very powerful. So on the next slide, we describe just a little bit of those 8 global channels that Yet2 uses to go out and do our proactive scouting. Our response, our alternative to the crowd, if you will. And a lot of our channels are direct in nature, where we've been building up those contacts day by day over the last 20 years. And some of our channels are a little bit more crowd-like in a broadcast sense of the term. We've actually greatly expanded our online social media presence in those inventor solution provider communities over the last couple of years as well. So, we like to talk kind of starkly for purposes of the webinar today and for sport and fencing and all that good stuff. But in reality, we've blurred a little bit toward crowdsourcing ourselves over time.
Yeah, that's really interesting.
So then I think my punchline for the day, we'll see where Christian lands on this. We see lots of opportunity for the combination of a proactive scouting effort plus a crowd can often yield much greater benefit than either tool by itself. And we've done a bunch of work along these lines. We're showing in the upper right on this slide a project that we've just recently worked on, which we call Saving the Whales, because that's what the project was. How do you pull those nasty lines and nets that run from the surface down to traps and cages on the ocean floor? Those traps and those nets are the single biggest source of whale death, other than illegal hunting. And if you could simply be able to locate the traps on the floor without those tracking nets, you'd save a bunch of whales in a big hurry. And we went out and did proactive scouting to identify the types of technologies, to identify specific solution providers who absolutely need to be a part of solving this problem. And then we turned this set of insight. We also reframed a couple of very specific parts of the problem that you can isolate and solve in a much more, we think, of a much more successful and much quicker way. And our client, which is the US government, will be translating that into prize challenges shortly that we think are going to be much smarter, much more focused, much more likely to yield successful solutions at the back end because of that proactive scouting that really helped them set the strategy well for that. So that's a nice example where we see scouting first leads into a smarter challenge. We've seen a bunch of cases where challenge first, then it arms us to do much smarter scouting later on. So our punchline is actually, if it's important enough, go do both.
Yeah, that's great. And I love that use case example because, I sail and it's amazing how much crap is in the water. Let's kind of pin down what we mean by tech scouting, what we mean by crowdsourcing in kind of more specific ways. So do you want, let me start with to kind of pinning down, crowdsourcing, and we're specifically talking about, in fact, I've got a little slide here. We're specifically talking about open innovation, like crowdsourcing knowledge work. crowdsourcing is an open call, on the internet, um, where you basically pose a challenge, a goal, you provide an incentive, you provide rules and a timeline and guidelines, and so it's basically like a wanted dead or alive poster for the modern era. Tim, why don't you give a kind of a quick version of what crowdsourcing is,
Yep.
or
So
tech scouting, sorry.
So tech scouting, proactive scouting, similar goal in mind. How do we find the best solutions out there in the world to be able to solve a technical challenge? However, as opposed to the crowd, with proactive scouting, they're not really rules. It's fairly open-ended how we engage with the solution providers. And then it's a negotiation between that solution provider and our client, the searching company. That's an open negotiation to determine what's a form of deal that works for both sides. Often a license or joint research, sometimes outright acquisition if the fit is really strong enough, but a little bit more open-ended than those rules that you set in place and that prize you offer at the end of a crowd challenge. I think the other big difference, we use those 8 channels that you're showing right there to go out and we identify who we think are the solution providers.
Right.
We and a couple 100,000 of our best friends out in the Yeti network. So we're not waiting for the solution providers to decide whether they're relevant or not and whether they should reply or respond or submit. We're going to go call you. So we're going to do a bunch of searching, scour the earth, identify maybe 100 small companies, large companies, universities, research labs, contract manufacturers, experts in the space. We're going to identify 100 or 200 of those. Then we're going to go call the 30 or 40 we think look most promising and work with our client to filter down to the 2 or the 5 where we'll move into collecting samples. We'll move into evaluations and due diligence and confidentiality agreements, and then ultimately assist our client in moving into a deal with the 1 or 2 top solution providers who solve their problem. So a little bit more hands-on, much more proactive from us out to the solution providers, rather than letting the submitters decide if they want to participate or not.
That makes a lot of sense. So if I can mix my metaphors then, so it's kind of like, crowdsourcing is kind of like, the FBI's most wanted list, right? Where they kind of, share who they want, often with a bounty attached to it. And, hey, if anybody helps us find this person, whereas tech scouting is kind of like a FBI task force, right? It's a group of investigators who are going to proactively go and find their perpetrator. Makes sense, right?
Yeah, very good.
Yeah. I think another big difference is well, let me just jump over here actually. Okay. So another big difference I think is the problem domain versus solution domain focus, right? So if you think about it, and you can look at any innovation or any tech acquisition as having both a problem domain and a solution domain, right? So for example, if we're talking about, let's say, Starbucks wanting compostable, cups and lids and straws for their stores, the problem domain is the impact of plastic and non-compostable products and the waste that's created. That's the problem domain. The solution domain is about, for example, the use of corn-based plasticizers or whatever, right?
Dissolvable papers, PVOHs.
Yeah, and so crowdsourcing is works best when you interface on the problem domain, meaning you share the problem, and you define you define how you measure the problem and measure the breakthrough that you're looking for? Like measure the solution. How do we test the solution? That becomes your bounty criteria, right? Then you incentivize it, and then you provide guidelines like, we want to use things that are sustainable, or they have to fit within a certain unit cost, or they can't involve hazardous materials, or so you can provide a set of rules that add additional constraints to the solution domain, right? Like we're willing to solve this problem, but only with these constraints. So that's kind of the crowdsourcing approach. The tech scouting approach sounds like it's more in the solution domain when, let's say, a company is clear how they want to solve a problem in broad strokes, meaning we're looking for biodegradable plastics or biodegradable materials. Like there's probably other ways to solve this, like reusable cups, whatever, right? To use the Starbucks analogy, but we're looking for this type solution, and that's when text coding works best. Is that an accurate representation, or how would you?
Yeah, I would have said that the client is probably in a pretty similar space in both cases, much more on the problem domain side of the world. And in fact, when clients come to us with presumptions or ideas or locked thinking about solution spaces, that makes us very nervous because often they're thinking in terms of their geography and their technology capabilities. And we might see a great solution to their problem in an adjacent industry and an adjacent geography. And we'd rather not they not constrain that solution set prematurely. But we yet too, and the experts we bring to work on these projects and those broadcast networks that I talked about a couple minutes ago, we all end up thinking very heavily in solution domains. So those categories that we were showing on the cold chain, absolutely, that's where we spend the bulk of our time. Once we're comfortable that we've thought about what are the right solution domains, then we go knock them off one by one. Who are the best players in each? How do they compare to each other? Which approach is most likely to be able to solve all those constraints you described a couple minutes ago? So yeah, I think that's apt that we spend a lot of our time on the solution domain side of the world.
Gotcha. Yeah. So, but it sounds like you guys will help the client, kind of calibrate their focus on promising solution avenues, right?
Like, in fact, we prefer that they not have thought too much about that before they come to us.
Yeah. Yeah. I find that I think it's human nature. Whenever we're talking about a problem, it's just human nature to jump into solving it, right? Like it's the way we're wired. So it's we when we talk to clients and organizations interested in crowdsourcing, they almost always have a vision for what they're looking for. That creates a box. Do you know what I mean? Like it creates an inside the box thinking, right?
Yeah.
And
I can give you an example very briefly here if you like. We had a client not that long ago, recently, come to us. They make prepared ice cream, like ice cream sandwiches or ice cream cones. And the wrappers historically have been highly unenvironmental. You can't recycle those wrappers. When you try to recycle them, they screw up the recycle. There's aluminum in there. Then there's often another kind of metallization to them. And then you have the paper inside that. So when you start to pull the aluminum out and just go as pure paper, the lipids, the fats from the ice cream, leach into the paper. And then when you go on shelf to go buy your ice cream, you see this paper that looks like it's like, insipid or like filled with all this like waste stuff. And you're like, I'm not buying that. So when they tried to go to environmental, they lost the battle on shelf, and they came to us and they said, we need a coating. So inside the box, we need a coating that will protect the rest of the paper wrapper from the fat in the ice cream.
Right.
And we went at that for a little while. Pretty much any coating that you could dream of that's safe enough to be able to lay right next to food like ice cream, it's gonna crack somewhere at some point in the manufacturing or the distribution chains, or in the freezer, at the supermarket. And once it cracks, the lipids seep through the crack, leach into the paper, and you have that same nasty looking presentation at shelf. we finally figured out about a third of the way into the project, what if we switch this around? What if we put the anti-leaching function, what if we embed that into the paper itself? Forget about a coating and imbue that whole layer of the paper with this anti-leaching capability. In effect, you encapsulate the fats right where they start to enter the paper in the first place at a micro level so that you don't see it at shelf. All of a sudden you're winning at shelf again. You can withstand any of those cracks, any of the issues around distribution and transportation. And that solution is now on shelf out commercial. Continuing down that approach of trying to find a coating, and it took a while for us to convince our client that imbuing the full layer of the paper was actually a legitimate technical approach. They would still be inside that box.
Right.
Yeah, the less they lock themselves into boxes in the solution domain up front, the happier we are.
That makes a lot of sense. Yeah, I don't want to digress, but having spent a fair amount of time in kind of the, engineering related conversations and projects, I've developed a much higher respect for engineers and the challenges. When we use end products, everything seems so simple. Like it's easy, and then when you get into like the actual properties and materials, you realize it's not at all simple. Like it's amazing some of the challenges. Atoms just don't like to stay where you put them.
Yeah.
Especially when liquids are involved and stuff. And you think it's as simple as you just need something that's waterproof or whatever. But there's it turns out that there's hardly anything that's actually truly impervious of anything. Things are always moving around. The materials science is super challenging, and the fact that we even are able to build these products that work so well, like a lithium battery, with its challenges, and they work. It's pretty incredible. Like we're pretty crafty people.
There is good news in there as well, Christian. It's a job security for HeroX and Yet too as well.
Yeah, absolutely. No, it's really interesting, and because there's such an acceleration in technology, and companies are facing entering new products, creating Internet of Things applications, and all sorts of change in marketplaces. There's a lot of need for innovation and technology, and that's really great. No, that's good. Another area you mentioned about this is IP transfer stuff. Now, so why don't you drill down a little bit about okay, so you find a solution. How does, just at a broad brush, high level, right? How on the text coding side do you then help the client from okay, we've found a solution now. How do we handle the IP or licensing part of it?
Right. So let's take another example. We're looking for consumer insights firms that are Black or minority owned, or have great access into Black consumer communities. And so that's not something you can go Google for. There's not a website online somewhere that has a list of those. So we go out to our 8 networks, scour the earth, talk to a bunch of experts who are in our network, identify a bunch of these types of companies. Then we'll go out and interview each of them. In fact, we did one of those interviews this morning, and we have another one lined up tomorrow. And in collaboration with our client, we'll then identify a top 3 or 4 criteria our client is seeking in order to differentiate which of these firms look like the best solution, the best partner for us going forward. And it would be criteria like, how big is your audience of Black consumers? How well diversified are you across male, female, and different age vectors? Can you talk about hair? Can you talk about skin? Can you talk about cleansing? How rigorous is your process? How solid are your analytics people around being able to run the numbers well? Whatever that set of criteria is, a lot of our searches, a key criterion would be how comprehensive is the IP that you filed. Did you file it globally? Do we believe it really could preclude competitors from following? Another big criterion is stage of development. Everybody wants their solution now. So are you TRL 7 or 8 or 9 where we can go to market quickly? Or are you TRL 3 where we're going to have to spend a bunch of money at high risk and take a lot of time? So those criteria we worked out with our client. We then go out and ask all of the top 10 or top 12 or top 15 solution providers, what are your answers to those key 3 or 5 questions? And then we'll run a straight prioritization and be able to say, company C or company number 3 out of the 8 that we've interviewed in detail, they're by far the best likely partner for you because they fit this criterion, they fit that criterion. So it's a little bit of hand-to-hand combat with those top solution providers based on the decision-making criteria that our client's going to employ to solve that problem.
Gotcha. Interesting. Now you used a term. I think this is a really important term to discuss, TRL, and we use the same methodology. So let's talk about that and how that's applicable. Why it's important for a client to understand it, how it's applicable to both tech scouting, and I'll talk about how it's applicable to crowdsourcing.
Yeah, so TRL, technology readiness level, I think it was originally invented by DARPA or NASA or both, or maybe 40 years ago. It's just a common language to be able to describe how close to ready for commercial is a technology. Where TRL 1 is a raw idea, and TRL 9 is you've been commercialized somewhere relevant or interesting. Our clients generally are looking for anything TRL 3 or 4 or 5 plus. If you're TRL 9 and you're over $10 or $20 million of success in the marketplace, our client probably already knows about you, so we don't add much value there. So you can see where Yet2's window is. When clients come to us and say, we want a whole bunch of really creative TRL 1 and TRL 2 ideas, we'll often send them to HeroX because the crowd is a much more efficient way to come up with raw, creative new ideas than our proactive scouting networks. But happy, Christian, to have you chime in on that as well.
I'm not sure where it was invented, but it is heavily used by NASA, and it became a really critical component all the way back to the Apollo and Mercury programs. Just an understanding that that they had to do things that humans have never done before, create capabilities, that hit levels of capability that weren't possible in environments that just the things weren't designed for. And so they needed to have a method of managing risk and understanding the level of testing and validation that was required for things. So, it's easy at the business level. It's a common error to, read an article about a technology or something that's maybe TRL 1, 2, or 3, and then plan on embedding it in your product, for example, and not understand the steps that's required, to be able to commercialize and use technologies at an industrial scale. And when these things are skip the steps, you often see that in the form of failed products, right? That don't perform as they are expected, and also just spiraling costs, and poor quality, poor reliability, those other things. So we always try to map our clients' goals from a crowdsourcing standpoint to understand the TRL level that we're targeting. And crowdsourcing tends to be on the lower end of the scale. And I think tech scouting tends to be in the middle of the scale. Would that be accurate?
Very much so.
Yeah. And in fact, it's a great way to even determine whether an organization should look at tech scouting or look at crowdsourcing. If you're really looking for those raw ideas, the PhD student that spent 2 years working on a specific plastic coating for battery terminals, you're not going to find that very easily, because that's going to be down in TRL2, for example. It's a science paper almost, right? And so you can source a lot of the kind of more fundamental technology breakthroughs and ideas. And in fact, in crowdsourcing, it's not even about sourcing it. You can actually have people do it for you in real time, right? That's a fundamental difference from what we've talked about before. So that's an important concept. I think that organizations can use the TRL scale to help manage their own innovation approaches and avoid crazy technology that's too risky to work. If you're trying to find technology to solve a manufacturing problem that's in the hundreds of thousands of units a year manufactured, the requirements for readiness of a solution at that scale, that needs to be implemented in factories, et cetera, is very different than, let's say, building a prototype.
Yep. And the one other thing I'd add, Christian, we do some work even at TRL9. We have one client, I actually can talk about this a little bit. Mondelez's new snack futures group is trying to revolutionize how snacks are made, what their health profile looks like, what their life cycle analysis and their circular economy impacts on the environment are. And we're honored to be able to host their open innovation portal, which is a little bit of a mix of a crowd plus proactive, all in one platform there. And they are primarily interested in snacks that are already commercial, just not at much scale yet. Are you in 10 local supermarkets? They'd be extremely excited about that. They're just now starting to branch into early TRL as well, with a new innovation effort they call CoLab. That'll take us more toward the HeroX part of the spectrum. But that's one search we're doing right now for already commercial products. Another one, we have a toothpaste manufacturer who's looking for a contract manufacturer to help them produce excess oversupply of the product. And they are looking very much for a manufacturing company that's already been up and running, that is at scale, that has great quality assurance, packaging capabilities. So that's another example of a TRL9 type of search. We do get into those once in a while.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Well, that's great. What I thought I'd do is I'd like to talk about a couple of case study examples, and these are I've picked some that I think are good use cases for a crowdsourcing approach versus a text cutting approach. But I'd love to hear your thoughts on that. So let's start with this one. Right. So this is so let me just give the quick overview of this. So this was a gold mining company. They're called they're the ones that search for gold. I forget what they're called. They're not like the refiners are the ones that actually process the ore into gold. They're the prospectors, I guess. And they had purchased mining rights to a large region, and had a ton of geographical data that had been produced by the previous owner, and a lot of it was in a rough state, spanned 20 plus years, 1,800 core samples, gigabytes. I think the data set added up 6 terabytes, which is a lot of data.
That's
and they wanted to 6 terabytes, yeah. Yeah. And so think about even trying to download it. You know what I mean? Like, it's crazy. But they wanted the challenge we ran for them. They wanted people to find the gold. So the idea was analyze the 6 terabytes of data, and give us your analysis of where, like, how much gold is here, where is it, basically, find the gold. So they received over 100 submissions, organizations that process the data and look for gold. And so I see this as an example of where crowdsourcing fits better Obviously, this was at a larger scale from a budget standpoint than tech scouting would typically be. But just the problem domain they were looking at, have a lot of data. It's in a mess. We need to move fast. There's so much technology capabilities that we don't even know where to begin. So let's just put it out as a crowdsourcing challenge and see what happens. And it ended up being a really great success.
Mm. That's a very cool example.
Yeah. Yeah. Another example on the crowdsourcing side is this one, which we did a few years ago. And this is a good example of, for crowdsourcing, the ability, the one interesting thing about crowdsourcing is it's a public effort, right? Now you can do crowdsourcing confidentially by leaving the company's, the sponsor's name out of it and using a different brand. We have partners, often like consulting companies, who will run crowdsourcing projects for a secret client just to keep their identity out of it, because they don't want their competitors to know that they're interested in a certain problem or domain. But it can also be used. You can use the public nature of crowdsourcing, the fact that it's an open call and you're broadcasting it out. You can use it for your advantage. In this case, this was a challenge around, feeding into a larger contest that was feeding into a conference about finding entrepreneurs under 30 with really cool technologies, and they actually had investors who invested. So the $1 million they gave away was actually $1 million of investment into these early stage companies. They had over 2,700 submissions on this. So that's kind of like when you're looking at kind of this like type scale, crowdsourcing scales really well, right? Like if you're looking for high volume as the input, like a really broad funnel, I think that's where crowdsourcing works well. If you're looking for more precision, right, looking for the best, we need to see the best. I want to see the best 3 or the best 5 in this. That's where tech scouting shines. Am I right?
I think that's an excellent compare and contrast.
Yeah.
I don't think there's anything we could do where we could handle 2,700 potential solutions.
Yeah, and when you do that, you have to be broad, like that project we did. You have to provide a broad criteria that will fit well at that scale. Whereas with, I think, tech scouting can be very precise and specific.
How do you filter 2,700 candidate submissions? How do you get down to the 10 winners?
Oh yeah, well that's a whole nother topic, but that one in fact they were pretty familiar with and prepared for that volume. We've had other projects where we weren't expecting a large submission rate and we get like 10 or 20 times what we expected. And that's when it really becomes challenging. So we use a combination of machine, like algorithmic scoring, like pre-scoring of submissions to identify the most likely, the most promising ones, and then human review, and then the full like scoring and assessment of them. So we create a multi-phase thing that's technology assisted. But when you have large submission rates, especially in a complicated or technically challenging approach, you need to, it can become quite labor intensive, and you need to create a large set of judges who are participating in that. I think the largest set we've had is 180 judges on our platform.
Excellent.
Yeah, and our platform handles all the workflow for that. But just 2 quick shout outs on it though. Crowd voting also works well, where you share the submissions and let the crowd score and evaluate them. So that's crowd voting, and then also using a contest, like a finalist round contest model. So for example, I don't think I have this slide here, but we did an AI project for Lockheed Martin for AI piloting a drone. So they received lots of submissions. Well, instead what they did was they took the top 6, I think, and let them race the drones against each other, right? So that kind of sorts it out. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
and in fact, in order to winnow it down to the finalists, we actually created a virtual drone race. So we were able to let hundreds of innovators test their AIs in a virtual drone race online, and then create a scoreboard there. So that is another, like, those approaches of creating contests that provide selecting is another powerful tool for doing that.
Very cool.
Yeah, great. So I think we're almost out of time. I know we kind of jumped around a little bit, and I hope people have gotten a feel for for some of the differences. But we can take a question or two.
Yeah, great. Thank you. So I'm going to come back on screen here. We've got several interesting questions come through. So panelists, you can see those questions in both the Q&A and the chat. I think that this is an interesting one from Jose. So what formal education do you suggest to improve your innovation skills? There are courses on offer in the marketplace these days, but I'd really like to hear from both sides in terms of the skills necessary or the experience, or what route you might suggest people take to get involved as an innovator.
Good question. I'll give you my answer first. So and it's going to be a bit of a contradictory answer, but I think I don't have a college degree. I dropped out of university to start my first company, and so it just felt it was too constraining for me to fit into it, and I think some people are like that. That being said, I have a huge like desire for education and value education greatly, and highly recommend that people have become lifelong learners, and degrees and post-secondary education I think is really great. None of that is going to be useful for innovation, and in fact the more you kind of have a conception, the more you spend in the conceptual realm of innovation, like learning about innovation in schools, I actually think it can get in the way. I think the innovation's kind of like tap dancing. Classroom lectures on how to do it ain't going to help beyond the basics. You need to tap dance and practice. So practicing innovation is really important. And the hard part about it is the failures, because without failure, there is no innovation, right? It's just a project, right? Like going to the store to get milk is not an innovative act, right? But finding milk in the Sahara Desert would be, right? So there's failure, and so if you want to get good at innovation, practice it, working on stuff where you're going to deal with a lot of failure. That's the secret power.
So I would add, in a very similar vein, I'm not a big fan of academic coursework around innovation either. And in fact, I can tell you our hiring strategy at Yet too. We look for people who have a strong technical background, but then most importantly, kind of right along with that failure idea, we look for people who have passion for these topics, for crossing that chasm, for solving some of these key problems that would be great to move us ahead in this world. And so if you show me somebody with a technical background, even an undergrad in engineering or in chemistry or whatever, and they have a passion for solving these types of problems, we'll teach you the skills. You have to go out and practice. We'll give you a lot of that at Yet too on a daily basis. Go work in a large company. And one other place where I do think you can accelerate your education a little bit is at a lot of the innovation conferences, and listening to people talking about the war stories and putting up their case studies, especially those conferences where you're allowed to talk a little bit about the failures, because you'll get a lot more learning out of the failures than the successes. But agreed, I would bias heavily toward real world and some of those personality traits rather than an academic coursework.
Yeah, excellent. I mean, for me, what comes to mind is sharpen your PowerPoint skills, your presentation skills, your, ability to refine and define concepts, writing skills, some of those basics really. Um, and interacting and networking. And I mean, we could probably go into another session completely on, what this means for the future of work and education altogether. I think that there's another interesting question. It has to do with, I'm taking it more to do with like the challenge design phase. So maybe we could briefly touch on like, the question was, what process do you undertake to understand the challenge that is trying to be solved in the tech scouting route? Does the client bring it to you, or does yet to do the research to define it? And we could probably answer this from both the HeroX and the yet to side. I know we touched on it. So is there any last comments on that?
Yeah, and I'll go first this time around, and then serve into Christian. We do really prefer that our clients not have gotten very far into trying to define it or propose that solution space that we were talking about earlier. Bring us the problem. We'll work through it together. If we don't think our networks and our approach are going to help very much, we'll tell you that, because we would far rather pass than fail trying to take on a project. One of our clients that we can talk about just as an example is this little beverage company called Pepsico. I don't know if you've heard of them, but they do a great job with us these days of identifying new strategic technology roadmap spaces they're interested in moving into. And I can't share any of the details publicly because a lot of that's very sensitive information. But they'll throw topic areas at us, and then we'll brainstorm with their teams. Do we think we can define a search? Do we think we can define a problem set that's going to yield useful and valuable results and move them ahead? And then based on whether we like that answer or not, we then jointly decide whether to move into a full project or not. That PepsiCo approach we really like a lot.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I think I bet you there's a lot of parallels in terms of the design phase, like the design and planning phase for both tech scouting and crowdsourcing. I actually see that that early work could be done before even the decision of whether to do tech scouting or crowdsourcing or a hybrid is applied. And then the shape of it becomes more specific once you've decided which one's the better fit.
Yeah, excellent. And I mean, just to add to the earlier comments, like challenge design, the field of challenge design as a career opportunity is, I think, a very growing sector. So branching from there, this one might be interesting from both sides too. The common demographic of crowdsource respondents. Like, I mean, really, this from both sides, we're seeing a global involvement. But can we speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, so we've had participation from hundreds of thousands on HeroX challenges. And we've got a lot of insights into the demographic side. Interesting thing is, so it's far more egalitarian than your typical demographic for tech or other industries. There tends to be two bumps. The first bump would be people early in their career, post-secondary graduates, people just after that, kind of wanting to make a mark in their career, pursuing their interests. There's another bump, closer to the retirement age. I think it has to do with the discretionary time and the accumulated expertise that people build during that time. They have the time and the resources, and most importantly, the insights and expertise that they've developed to be able to participate in these. So those are the two kind of demographic bumps that we see the most. But what's really interesting is that 75% of the best solutions are sourced from non-experts in crowdsourcing. And that means that these are like people who aren't like, if let's say it's a data science thing, they're not a formal data science person. Now this tends to be more on the creative side of the crowdsourcing challenges. The more technical they get, I think the ratio skews in the other direction. But that's a really great segue into a hybrid approach of using both tech scouting and crowdsourcing. You use the tech scouting to give you that targeted precision and the proactivity for a solution, but then use crowdsourcing for the wild card and the X factor. And the two can be done in parallel very successfully.
So I would add from the yet to side, probably our plurality of solution provider is a startup company that has gotten to some kind of a pilot commercial scale. So it might be a team of 5 or 20. They might have raised some money. They know who their first customer is. They know what they need to do to scale to get to commercial with that first customer. That's probably our most repeated profile of solution provider. We certainly see individual experts as being key solution providers in certain types of work. Large companies, research institutes, small companies that are a couple hundred people, those all fit into the network as well, and those all have solved some really important problems for our clients. But more on the company side with the technology moving along than a lone inventor, if you will.
Mm-hmm. That's great.
Excellent. So thank you both. You certainly start to see the case for the hybrid approach to using both methods. This has been an excellent conversation today. We're just nearing the last minute. Any final thoughts from both of our panelists today before we wrap up?
Well, I'd say from our perspective, we're very honored to be along with HeroX. Thank you very much for sharing the hour with us. I don't know if we answered that scouting's better than crowdsourcing or the other way, but we're very excited about our partnership and looking forward to solving problems with you all.
Yeah, I mean, I would say that the question it's a bit of a false question. It's kind of like saying what's better, a hammer or a screwdriver, right? Well, you can't be answered unless you have an application for it. But I think that companies, it's important for companies to be committed to innovation. It's a core competency for organizations that want to, be competitive and stick around for a while. And they need to have both of these solutions, these tools in the tool belt. And then they bring it out when the right tool is needed. And so I would invite all organizations committed to innovation to proactively, gain expertise and understanding and practice in both tech scouting and crowdsourcing, so that you can move quickly and you can use these two powerful tools for innovation as you evolve and deal with the changing times.
Perfect. And with that, I think we've covered it all. Thank you both for your time. To our participants, you'll be receiving a recording of the webinar, and we invite you to further explore both companies and reach out to us anytime with your questions and queries. Thank you, gentlemen.
Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Bye for now.